Between the years 2010 through 2017, Gibson did a run of guitars known as the Collector's Choice. In its entirety, this was a run of 42 different models, primarily focusing on recreating original Burst guitars. Most of them had plans of producing up to 300 pieces, utilizing real scans of the exact guitar. But not all of them were Les Pauls, including a Firebird, a 335, a DC Junior, and a Custom. Today, we're going to learn about all of them. Because let's face it, their numbering system's a little bit weird, they didn't go in order, they skipped numbers, and to the general onlooker, a lot of these just end up looking the same, so there's a lot of confusion. Let's see if we can clear it up. Starting things off, Collector's Choice 01A Gary Moore. This is a very famous guitar, mainly because it just recently got reissued again, since Kirk Hammett owns it. But at one point in time, Gary Moore, well known for his works within the group Thin Lizzy as well as his own solo career, primarily used this very unique burst. One of the most identifying features on it is the pinky wear on the top, as well as our mix-match knobs. This one had to be heavily aged to match the guitar, and yes, they replicated the headstock break. And these came with a COA signed by Gary, so this was before his passing in early 2011. However, this version was extra limited at only 125 pieces, with an MSRP of $12,468. But it was duplicated within the series as CC01V Melvyn Franks. Melvyn Franks at that time was the current owner of that guitar. He got it from Gary Moore, but it's also important to know why it's called Greenie is its ownership by Peter Green before then. But this more so looks like a recreation of it like if it wasn't completely aged. So that's why this one was a little bit less limited and less expensive when it was brand new, but still has, basically the same gist of it, minus fake headstock breaks. And that's why I got the different model marker. The original serial number, of course, being 92208, replicating that butterscotch VOS finish. Collector's Choice 02A Goldie. This one went after that green lemon burst hue with original serial number of 90629 with an MSRP of $11,762 but a street price of $8,332. This one gets its name not because it's a gold top, but because it's like the Goldilocks of the bursts. It's the best year, 1959. It's got the phenomenal top, it's got the documented history, so it was replicated as best as they could in this aged green lemon finish, with the light aging and mismatched characteristics of the humbucker pickups. Its first owner was located in Deer Park, Texas, but then resurfaced in the early 80s at one of the first Dallas guitar shows where its Goldie name was given, and it's kind of passed hands a few different times like Vic DePra and Tom Whitwick, although it's currently in the care of an anonymous collector who loaned it to Gibson for this. And no two will be aged exactly the same, but it looks like you get a little bit of arm wear right here, and just general light playing, until you get to the back where it's got a bit more heavy buckle rash. But as far as your headstock, it still has the original tuners, with some wear on the neck. Collector's Choice 03A, The Babe. Original serial number 00137, replicating that cherry T-burst color with an original MSRP of $9,409. This is a reissue of a 1960 burst that Joe Bonamassa used to own. This one definitely switches things up. It's got that very bright, vibrant cherry sunburst as these are known for, but it's got a Bigsby. And I like how they recreated this vintage piece to place around the ABR1. And this particular one has a pretty cool fretboard. Following that up, Collector's Choice 04A Sandy. Now this is a popular burst. Here we had an MSRP of $7,999, 300 pieces made, in the Dirty Lemon Sunburst, with serial number 91228. The story behind Sandy is it was another one owned by collector Tom Whitrock, and he had purchased it all the way back in 1989. And only sold it about 4 years ago to a shop in Taiwan. But it's another example of a really good looking burst, but it's also iconic due to the uncovered humbuckers. This version got all the heavy aging, top, back, and sides everywhere. However, as a more limited edition production run, CC04V Sandy only had 50 pieces and it was unaged. So you could still have that great looking guitar with the iconic look of Sandy, but without all the scratches, nicks, and dings. You can enjoy it yourself. However, I will say the Collector's Choice aging, if you've tried an aged guitar previously and you didn't like it, I actually really enjoyed the feeling of the worn-in necks on these, based on the one that I've tried. Next up to bat, 05A Donna. This is another one of Tom's bursts that they duplicated from serial number 91923, with an MSRP of $10,499 with just a generic sunburst finish. although this is one of the later made ones in 2015, when they were doing the true historic specs. But with the A in the serial number, you can tell that it's also been aged to slightly match the original guitar, although nowhere near as heavy as some of these others that we've seen, and the burst hue is very different. Collector's Choice 6A is known as number 1. The original serial number 91918 with an MSRP of $6,332, 300 pieces made in the cherry red burst finish. This one's kind of cool. It was a guitar owned by the guy who got me into guitars, Mike Slabowski. His old internet articles just inspired me to do what I do today, and hopefully I inspire others. And we keep Gibson's history alive. But apparently this was the best burst that he ever owned. Hence his number 1. Kind of hard to find a whole bunch of photos of these, but it appears they have slightly more mild tops. Definitely has a pretty strong border for a 59 yet. But now 7A is John Shanks. Original serial number is 00289 in the Cherry Sunburst aged hue, with an MSRP of $6,665. John Shanks is a phenomenal producer. He sold over 60 million albums and 45 number 1 hits. Worked with people like Bon Jovi, Lindsay Lohan, Goo Goo Dolls, Ashley Simpson, Sheryl Crow. I mean, you can look at all this stuff that he wrote. So this was one of the bursts within his collection. This is another 1960 reissue. Looks like they gave it the heavy aging treatment. And it's got a vibrant, but not over the top red border to it, so that's looking nice. But it definitely has the heavy belt buckle wear on the back. But yet the neck is clean on this one. Oh, and very important, we've got the Grover tuners. And of course, all the finish checking. But now Collector's Choice 08A, The Beast. This was Bernie Marsden's old guitar. May he rest in peace. It nearly came up for auction last year, but he's best known for playing in the group Whitesnake as well as UFO, as well as his own stuff. And in my opinion, it's one of the best looking bursts, so here's one of the recreations. It's got the heavy arm wear, nicks and dings, finish checking like we've seen on everything else, but it seems like they put a little bit more love and attention into these. The flame top just speaks to me. And then of course we've got this wear on the back. And interesting. I hope to one day document one of each. But the purpose of making this video is to kind of show you some of the differences, like this one has the extra jumbo fret wire on it, mimicking what's currently on the guitar. And oh, looks like this one also has a headstock crack that they had to recreate, and lots of wear on the neck. And definitely the headstock, cool! Usually I would hate this on a used guitar, but if it's mimicking the original, okay, sloppy string put on job, there you go. And Les Paul model really worn off. The original serial number of the Beast is 91914, and it has that dirty lemon finish, with an MSRP of $7,999. But now Collector's Choice 09A, The Believer Burst. This one was a little bit more limited than the others at 100 pieces, but it replicated serial 90850 in the Cherry Sunburst aged hue, with an MSRP of $9,199. The story behind this one is there's a famous book out there called Burst Believers, and there's been a few different iterations, but this guitar was used on the cover of one of them, and it's owned by Vic Duprat, one of the authors of it, hence why. This one really tried to recapture that Cherry Sunburst aged hue, but you know, at first glance it just looks like any other kind of 59 reissue. This particular one was actually signed on the back because it's the prototype. So no, they won't all have that signature on the back, but this one definitely received the heavy age treatment, including on the headstock, with what looks like the original having replaced tuners with the modern ones that have the washers, and then it got restored at some point in time. So that's a nice little attention to detail thing. But here's the thing, they all look vastly different. I wish I could sit here and show you every single variation, but here's the backside of the headstock of a normal one, and our COA. Now so far, in a sea full of bursts, we're finally getting to one that's a little bit different. Collector's Choice 10A, Tom Scholz, is one that gets me excited and angry. So Tom, better known as the guitarist of Boston, utilizes a very famous guitar, a 1968 Goldtop that had been stripped from the top, had the humbucker routed, and he put Mighty Mouse on it. Then it looks like we've got some significant modifications down here too. It's just one of the coolest guitars, but obviously Gibson couldn't put Mighty Mouse on here, or they didn't want to try hard enough to. So this is what we got. A plain maple top, but at least we have the cool P90 humbucker combination with the double cream in the bridge. But what's really fascinating here is the fact that this was a reissue of a 1968 Les Paul rather than a Burst, even though I'm sure they probably just built it the same as all the other ones, but it looks like they might have had to recreate a headstock break on this one too, or at least a small wing separation, and maybe even some wear on the headstock. But you know what I've never actually really took the time to appreciate about these? The fact that they do have quite a bit of aging on that natural finish. Not every photo is really going to show that off, so you get wood grain and the age. But it looks like this one also utilizes his style of fret wire, and it's just ultra heavy aged on the back. And yes indeed, we can confirm the wear as well as the replaced tuners. But they made 300 of those with an MSRP of $6,665. The original serial number of that guitar is 529262, and at least Tom signed the COAs. But CC11A is Rosie. This one features the dark cherry sunburst color, and it's based on serial number 90925. I couldn't really find a good explanation for the name, however, I would assume it's because it's got a lot of its red coloring to it yet in 1959, so that's when the dyes would still fade out. So basically modeled after an amazingly preserved 1959 Les Paul. But this one's got the aging, but it's relatively light all things considered, and had an original MSRP of $6,998. Next up, 12A is Henry Goldtop. Stylized after original guitar 73939, they made 300 of these with an original MSRP of $6,165 in a gently aged gold top finish. Why is it called Henry Goldtop? At that time, Gibson's CEO was Henry Juskowitz, so a notable person within the company's history, but it just seems like an averagely aged gold top. Like, that's not what I envisioned when I thought of light age. That looks pretty heavy to me, but it's different from all the other bursts. We've got a gold top in here, and that's probably exactly why they did it, to have a little bit of variety. But that is a guitar within his collection. For our next famous burst, it's Collector's Choice 13A, known as the Spoonful Burst. That's another one you'll see people talk about quite often. This one is recreating a Dirty Lemon Burst with an MSRP of $7,998, and the original serial number was 91352, and they made the full 300 of this run. But our history behind this one is John Sebastian owned it, and he was part of the band The Loving Spoonful. I'm sure you've heard some of their works whether you know it or not, such as Do You Believe in Magic? At the time of recreation, collector Gordon Kennedy had it in his collection all the way since 1993. As far as notable things aging-wise, it looks like they had to recreate the cracks around the knobs. There's a photocopy of a handwritten history of the guitar, and perhaps an homage to their song Rainbow All Over Your Blues. They gave you a rainbow case shroud. I like that one, it's got a little bit extra going for it. Now we have a faded Lemon Burst recreation, Collector's Choice 14A, under the codename Waddy Wachtel. He's an American musician, composer, record producer, as well as a hired gun session musician, and he's worked with people like Linda Ronstadt, Beth Hart, Stevie Nicks, Keith Richards, including the lead guitar work of Saint on Me within the Rolling Stones, as well as Bon Jovi, Iggy Pop, the names go on and on. Perhaps most noticeable about this one is the fact that we have a B5 Bigsby thrown on it. That is not a traditional look for most bursts. And then our tuners have also been replaced. However, they're for 70 Scholz, which is a nice change from your usual modifications of Grovers. But this was one they did in 2014 to the full 300 pieces with an MSRP of $7,300. Now Collector's Choice 15A, the Greg Martin Burst. Despite still being called a faded Dirty Lemon, this one looks significantly different from the Wachtel, but it was made in the standard 300 pieces, replicating serial number 86756 with the original MSRP of $6,332. Here you can see Greg with the original. So similar to the Spoonful Burst that he saw, he fell in love with that guitar, and then he saw other people like Michael Bloomfeld playing his. He always knew he wanted one, but it wasn't until 1990 when he finally got one, because the Kentucky Headhunters Picking on Nashville was about to achieve gold status when the band that he was part of was offered an opening slot on Hank Williams Jr.'s Lone Wolf Tour. And he knew Hank had a 58 because he had seen him play it, so he borrowed it off of him and then used it in some music videos, such as in Oh Lonesome Me, and from there he just kind of took it on the road. And apparently sometime within this guitar's history, it was also once owned by Ed King of Lynyrd Skynyrd fame. So tons of different artists could be associated with this one. This particular example I found has some really crazy wood grain, which I guess when you go back to the original, it has a little bit of that, and they tried their best to recreate this little wear area, but this one's a little bit more exotic. The tuners were left alone here. And if you were to take the pickguard off, it's nice to know that they did leave the fade right there. Pretty cool. But speaking of Lynyrd Skynyrd and tan lines, transitioning to Collector's Choice 16A is Red Eye. It replicated serial number 90891 to 300 pieces with an MSRP of $7,998 going after that Dirty Lemon Burst finish. But this was Ed King's guitar. Although as part of the history, it was famously stolen from Ed King at gunpoint in 1987, and it didn't get back to him for another 10 years. But when King passed, the guitar ended up at Carter Vintage, and they called Jason Isbell over to do some of the playing for their YouTube channel. That video's still out there in YouTube land if you want to go look it up. And at that point, he fell in love with it, and now it's still with him. The key identifying characteristic of this one is the finish has not faded right here, giving it the red eye. And it's got the uncovered PAFs. Although as far as the conditions go, this one was not aged anywhere near as heavily. Collector's Choice 17A is known as the Louis Burst. They made the full 300. It's an original replica of 91062 with that nice Dirty Lemon Burst finish with an original MSRP of $7,998. And it features a Burstbucker 3 neck pickup and a 57 Classic in the bridge. It is owned by Buck Cherry's Keith Nelson, and apparently he selected this one out of 6 other Bursts after rigorously playing them on the road, so it's his #1 favorite Les Paul. Now as far as the name Louis, it appears that's in reference to the collector who he bought it off of, who had it in his private collection for over 30 years. But now let's reissue a 1960. So this is a reissue of serial 01167. So not only will we have that thinner neck profile, but it's more of a dark burst, and it goes by the name Collector's Choice 18A, the Dutchburst. Now is it the Flying Dutchman who owned this one? No. It was actually acquired in 1961 by a Dutch jazz musician who played in a trio on a cruise ship, and it belonged to him his entire life. When he passed, he gave it to his son, and then it looks like it was later sold by Max Guitar over in the Netherlands. So outside of being built in Kalamazoo, Michigan, everything else was Dutch about it. That's why the name. As far as our aging patterns go, it looks like it has some characteristic wear in a few areas that are a little bit more in your face, and it nearly has like a tri-burst tone to it. This one also has impressions from washers, and then we've got a characteristic upside down V scratch here. For Collector's Choice 19A, we're just going to throw the rulebook out of the window. This is the Dave Hinson model. It's a double cut Les Paul Jr. Doesn't really fit in with anything else in the Collector's Choice series. That's kind of what makes it cool. Now, if you're not familiar with Dave, he's one of the editors on the Vintage Guitar Price Guide. Apparently, he works as an appraiser with Heritage Auctions and is on the board for the Modern Guitar Museum in LA, and is just known as a guitar collector, owns 2 shops himself, Killer Vintage in Dallas and St. Louis. Undoubtedly, they used this one because it was a rare finish, and it was one of the more cheaper ones out of the run, $5,332 for the MSRP, but they still made the full 300 pieces in 2016. It's one of those ones that I really would not mind documenting over a modern-day Murphy Labs aged one, just because this has a little bit more history to it. It's pretty much the black swan of the collection, but it's got some vibes with all that heavy aging. But next, we got to go to Collector's Choice 22A. That's right, they skipped 20 and 21. Now we've got Tommy Colletti with a triple pickup Black Beauty, copying serial number 90984. That had an MSRP of $8,299, was done up in the year 2015 to 300 pieces. Tommy here, he's the owner of Music Zoo. So what's great about that is Tommy's actually in his video when the Music Zoo documented this. Besides being a cool 3-pickup Black Beauty custom, it has a very soft V neck shape profile to it to make it unique, and this one has a little bit more history to it as well. It originally belonged to James Honeyman Scott, the guitarist and founding member of the Pretenders. But then Tommy acquired it many years ago and kept it in his personal collection. The original case for this guitar even has the Pretenders stenciled into it, although they could not recreate that for the Collector's Choice run. We jump over 23 to 24A, Nicky. That's a big name one, and it had quite the staggering price at $10,499 MSRP. Built to true historic specs with the lemon sunburst finish, we're copying serial number 91945. So Daughtry's probably best known as the Les Paul Forum co-owner and moderator, based in Houston, Texas. But it's a nice lemon sunburst that they did up in 2015. And it definitely ranks up there as one of the nicer bursts that we've seen. And he just recently sold the guitar in August of last year. But that's just one of the bursts within his collection. 25 was skipped, so now the Whitford Burst as Collector's Choice 26A. This had the MSRP of $7,998, recreating the original serial of 90653 in what they called Whitford Sunburst. This was a recreation of Brad Whitford's Burst. He's best known for working with the group Aerosmith. He even has songwriting credits to one of my favorite songs of theirs, Last Child. It's kind of a faded out lemon, except for you have just a little bit over here on the thumb, but it's heavy aged to match the original. And then 27 got skipped, so we move on to CC28A, the STP Burst. They're billed as a faded cherry sunburst color. They had an original MSRP of $6,332, limited to 300 pieces, and the original serial number of the guitar is 86787. Now this is one I have documented on the show if you want to see a collector's choice up front and personal. I would love to document more of them, but I always thought collector's choices were just gimmicks, not that good, kind of boring collector and store owner replicas of their bursts, but this is the one that changed my mind about the entire series. And as a fun little snippet, I actually sold that collector's choice to the now owner of the original STP Burst. But STP does not stand for Stone Temple Pilots. This is Ronnie Montrose's guitar. And of course, don't forget his tenure with the Edgar Winter Group, hearing it in Frankenstein as well as on the solo of Free Ride. The reasoning for the name behind the STP Burst is it originally had one of those oval STP stickers on the front of the guitar near the toggle switch. But for whatever reason, the collector's choice didn't replicate that fading area. It's one of the more heavily aged ones out of the collector's choice run as far as the neck goes. I mean, the finish just worn off the neck. However, it's interesting. They almost finish over the worn areas to make it feel really smooth. The aging on the collector's choices feel way different than what they're doing current day production, based on my experience of this one. And then this one had a little bit of extra case candy with it. Collector's Choice 29 actually has two different versions, the A and V. They're known as the Tamio Okuda, both of them replicating the same guitar, 91165, in the aged sunburst hue, and both had 300 pieces. Okuda is a Japanese singer-songwriter. He started his career in 1986 as a member of the band Unicorn. And after they broke up, he started his own solo career, and he's also written and composed for other various artists, including Puffy. You know, Hi Hi Puffy Amayumi show? But he actually has a signature Epiphone, and a signature Gibson ES330 in white, a CF100E, and kind of a cool rockabilly orange faded cherry. So a very famous Japanese rock musician. Sadly, I don't have any story of how he got his burst or anything. Maybe it's over in Japan and somebody can fill us in the comments section. This is definitely one of those ones geared more so towards the Japanese side of the market. It's got some pretty heavy wear on the back of the aged version. Now, on to Collector's Choice 30A, Gabby. It's got a Heritage Cherry Sunburst finish, replicating the original serial number 90291, with an original MSRP of $9,799 with 300 pieces. This is a previous one-owner burst that Vic DePra purchased. And Gabby is the shortened version of its original name, the Appraisal Burst. So the story is the original owner got it in 1959, kept and enjoyed it for many years, but around 2008, he thought it was time to sell, so they reached out to Gibson, who at that time would not provide any appraisal work or anything like that, so they referred it to Vic, and then Vic said, yeah, I need to own this thing because it is exceptionally clean, it's got the crazy awesome figuring, and with a fun little story like that, this limited edition series was born. Following that up, Collector's Choice 31A is Mike Reeder's The Snake. This one's noticeable because it was the very last Collector's Choice made, but it was limited to up to 300 pieces, replicated original serial number 90799, built to true historic specs, and the finish is called Reeder Burst. This one actually belonged to Brad Whitford at one point in time, and Mr. Reeder is a collector of guitars and owned it at this particular point in time. But the reason why it's called The Snake is due to two blemishes that kind of looks like the fangs of a snake bit the guitar. Then 32 got skipped over, so we've got Collector's Choice 33A, Jeff Hanna. Built to true historic specs in the brown lemon sunburst finish, replicating serial number 02176. They made a maximum of 300 with an MSRP of $9,299. Jeff is best known as the longest serving member of the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, where he was a partial singer, songwriter, lead guitarist, drummer, and washboard player for him. But he's also worked with tons of other people like Rascal Flatts, Hannah Montana, Emmylou Harris, Dickie Betts, Earl Scruggs, Steve Martin, just to name a few. So this is a recreation of one of his guitars. My take, it's a really nice agey lemon looking color. The particular one on the screen looks pretty nice, and you've got that nice dark aniline dyed back. But an identifying characteristic is the rounded over ear of the headstock here, and significant wear along the edges. Next is one of my favorite stories for vintage guitars ever, Collector's Choice 34A Blackburst. They only made 100 of these things. It's an ebony finish over a cherry sunburst, replicating the original serial of 00162. So last I knew, this was within Joe Bonamassa's collection, and the story is, the gentleman who originally purchased this guitar wanted a black Les Paul custom, but he couldn't afford it. So he asked the shop, can I have this lowly Les Paul standard that's only $265, a whole whopping $130 cheaper at that time, in black? So Gibson painted him a standard up in black. And apparently they just took one that was already on the line, sprayed it over, and then the rest is just history. But it was discovered in 2002 in a retirement home, and then Bonamassa bought it from the guy who got it from there. But it is a 1960 reissue, but it's an early one that has the big neck. Painted over guitars are always kind of cool, like it's very popular in Fender's history, but not as much in Gibson lore. Gibson did an actual proper painted over series around 2017. If you like this idea, but you don't want to pay collector's choice pricing, this is one of those ones I wouldn't mind documenting because it's just cool to me, with the aging showing off the cherry underneath it. But now Collector's Choice 34A, the Gruhn Burst, has an interesting tale. The original serial is 90627. This was one of the big price tag ones, $10,499, but it was limited to just 100 pieces max. Built to the true historic specs, and they called it Gruhn Burst finish. So at first you might think, yeah, that's just one in George Gruhn's massive collection. But you would actually be wrong. This is another one within Vic Dupra's collection. This is one that he purchased from Gruhn's guitars a long time ago, before Google and eBay, where you'd have to wait for photos of the guitar to come through the mail, and then you call them up and say yes or no. We live in very different times, but apparently Vic saw the photo, said yes, send it my way. It was a super clean guitar that was a one owner before it went to Vic, and now here we are with the Collector's Choice series. True to the original guitar, it doesn't exhibit tons of wear, but it's still got the finish checking in like a couple of dings. Collector's Choice 36A is known as Goldfinger. So this is the only 57 reissue within this, meaning it's a Goldtop still, but it's known as Goldfinger. It had the original MSRP of $6,699 done towards the end of the production in 2016. The original serial number was 73308, a maximum of 300 pieces, built to true historic specs with the aged Goldtop finish. Now the story behind this one is it's another one owned by Daughtry. Charles Daughtry, you know, the Les Paul Forum guy again. Now I would assume this one's called Goldfinger because of the unique finger-like wear pattern on the upper bout. Otherwise, it's just a really heavy aged Goldtop with a nice light back. And it's got the obnoxiously low Gibson logo, which is appropriate for some vintage models, high dotted I included. But I've been saying things like this is one of the coolest ones, or it's got the best story. I would have to make the argument that perhaps one of the most cited guitars, that's C-I-T-E-D, is Collector's Choice 37A Carmelita. You see this get thrown around all the time, so Carmelita has a very special neck profile that a lot of people just jive with. So if you do a made-to-measure with Gibson even yet today, 2024 and beyond, and tell you want the Carmelita neck, that is a thing that they know and they can recreate. The original serial number of this one was 9/1953, and within the reissue they call this the Carmelita Burst, built to true historic specs in 2016 with up to 300 pieces being made. This one's changed hands quite a few times. The first time it surfaced was in Hawaii, and it's been called the Hawaiian Burst, but then the seller of it at that time called it Carmelita due to the caramel color that it's got going on. But then when Tom Whitrock had it, he called it the Claw due to the formation by the pickups. And then I think before Tom, Vic had it, and then I know Bonamassa had it at one point in time, so it's gone through all the big collectors. But definitely one of those bursts that you have to know about. Now we've got Collector's Choice 38A, nicknamed Chicken Shack. I'll be honest, I never even knew this one existed. It was a last year production, 2017. Again, up to 300 pieces. It's a 1960 reissue, original serial number 00205. Built to true historic specs with an MSRP of $13,645. Shortly after this guitar came out, it was actually returned to its original owner, Stan Webb. But why is it called the Chicken Shack Burst? Did Buckethead own it? No, this is in reference to the Chicken Shack Band. It was founded in 1965 by Stan, and then he played that guitar live throughout the 80s. Before, surprise surprise, sold to Vic again in the early 90s, and they shipped it over to America, and then changed hands a few times after that. But as I understand it, it was Drew Berlin who owned it at this point in time. Drew appears to be a guitar collector and dealer. But this one's pretty unique due to the flame figuring. Bit of a reverse chevron flame pattern to it. Got your double cream PAF pickups, so it gives it that very cool iconic look, and all the wear and tear associated with that guitar. And our Les Paul model silkscreen definitely worn off on this one. But this is another one of those early 1960s that have 1959 specs. Drew likes to refer to those as double O's due to the highly desirable specs. Now, Collector's Choice 39A is known as the Andrew Raymond, but it's got a cool finish name, Minnesota Burst, built to true historic specs, again a second to last year example in 2016, with a maximum of 300 made. This one gets its name because it was brought to a dealer in Minnesota by its original owner, where it was quickly sold off to a private collector, in which people got really excited and started to talk about it because it was the first time it surfaced back then, and it's one of the more pristine original bursts to appear out of obscurity. But at the time of production, Andrew Raymond in the UK owned it. He's a private collector, but also a co-owner of Vintage Guitar Boutique in Shoreditch, London, and the name comes from where it was originally found. Then Gibson skipped over 40 and 41 and went straight to a very limited production of only 25 pieces, Collector's Choice 42A JD Simo. Instead of a Burst this time though, it's a Simo Cherry ES335, original serial number of 72739, making it approximately from 1962. JD Simo is a phenomenal guitar player, songwriter, and producer, and he's worked with Jack White, Tommy Emmanuel, Blackberry Smoke, Dave Cobb, among many others. But this is a recreation of one of his favorite guitars. But with only 25 made, I don't think Gibson had a lot of hope for that one selling a whole bunch of units. But still kinda cool, adds some variety to the series. Some more interesting specs behind this one that you might not have noticed. It's got the snake bite from a Bigsby, and it was refretted like some of those earlier bursts. But now Collector's Choice 43A, Mick Ralphs. Mick is best known as a British rock guitar legend. Throughout his time with Mott the Hoople and Bad Company, this was one of the guitars that he used, and the custom shop recreated these under true historic specs in Ralph Burst finish in the last year of production for these, 2017, with an MSRP of $7,499 and a maximum of 300 being made. The original serial number is 87049, making it originally a 1958 guitar. Apparently, the original Burst has kind of a bit of a story behind it, as far as some finish work on the backside of the headstock having to mask off the serial number. Some guys think it was chiseled out and replaced with a different one. I haven't actually seen the original to chime in, but it was for sale a couple of years ago for like $150K or something, so it obviously has some issues. From the one we've been looking at on the screen, it's actually a really nice looking Burst here. Perfect kind of iced tea like color. Got like an eye formation right here by the strings from picking wear. And oh cool, this one had Scholz put on it at one point in time, and then they went back to the original Kluson, so they replicated the filled in holes. And this one's got some pretty heavy neck wear and like a really dark cherry back. And as an added bonus, the COA was signed. Now we've got Happy Jack, Collector's Choice 44A, another final year example from 2017, replicating Victopra's 92072 Burst. Its finish mirrored its name, Happy Jack Burst. It's a very nice burst, but kind of like some of these other ones, it's a collector-owned burst that they wanted to replicate. As the True Historic series did like the big popular ones, they were trying to scrounge up some other cool ones to do. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any good story behind this one. CC45A is known as Danger Burst, with a matching finish also built to true historic spec in the year 2016, with an MSRP of $9,699, replicating the original serial of 90676. So that's a really cool name. Does it have a really fascinating story behind it? Kind of. So it's owned by this guy. I couldn't find his name anywhere. I think he might just want to be anonymous. But he always wanted a Burst, and this one was played in a European band called Danger. And during his hunt for an original Burst, he always felt like he was in danger of getting scammed of one of those ones that had been remade. I mean, I can totally understand that. You would definitely want to get the help of an expert to verify a Burst before you shell out the big money. We're talking like $400,000 plus in today's market. But since the word danger kept coming in his head and it matched the band, that's why he nicknamed this one the Danger Burst. But it's a nice lemon top that has been aged with significant wear around the headstock. You can see the wear to the finish over top of the holly veneer. But what's kind of cool is the aniline dyes have bled out on the back of this one, making it more of a brown color, and it looks like somebody had a strap button at the back of the heel. And we're almost there, my friends. Collector's Choice 46A is known as Kathryn. This was another last year production example, 2017, true historic specs, up to 300 pieces made, replicating the original 92023 serial in Bradoka Burst. Now, where that color came from was its current owner, Scott Berdoka, who appears to be a guitar player, collector, general musician, as well as a singer. The story goes, he got to hand select this out of a group of 59 bursts, and he liked the next feel. As far as the story behind the name, I'm sorry I couldn't find it. But it looks like you can find this in Vic's book, Burst Believers 3, on pages 80 to 81, so maybe there's more of a tale there. All things considered, I would say it's a pretty nice looking burst, but it certainly does have a lot of headstock wear. Look at that. And like maybe a cigarette burn or something. And ooh, another one with a headstock crack that they had to recreate and or deep gouge. It's kind of a unique location for that. Almost looks truss rod related, it's just not directly in the center, so it couldn't be. So maybe a ring. And we finally made it to the end. One more burst to look at. Nah, just kidding. The final number within the series was Collector Choice 47A. Apparently this one goes by Scott Softy. And it was a recreation of a 1964 Firebird 3 with serial number 235304, had an MSRP of $6,000, and was also produced in the final year of 2017. And it's cool because technically cherry is a custom color on a Firebird, and there were a lot of custom colors done in that original era. This one's got the teaspoon style vibrola, and it's a factory relic Firebird. There's not too many of those outside of the Johnny Winter Firebirds. Although it's not known exactly how many of these things they made, and unfortunately I could not find any additional stories behind it, but it must have been a collector-owned guitar. Now, I hope you guys understand the Collector's Choice series a little bit more. Personally, this series has always frustrated me because I just didn't really understand it. When I saw the name, Collector's Choice, I thought, hey collectors, this should be your choice. These are going to be massively valuable guitars. But now that I've done the research and presented upon it, I now understand what they were going for. This is collector-owned guitars being reissued. Now I kind of see why this got phased out. Sure, were there a couple of them in here that have pretty cool stories? Yes, but I can see why we now have just regular signature guitars still, because having an artist who played them is way more exciting than a collector owning it, as far as the romanticism behind it. But getting recreations of really famous ones like Sandy and Carmelita made complete sense. So at the end of the day, yes, there were clear winners within the Collector's Choice realm. Some of these are incredibly valuable yet today. Other ones have nearly completely fallen off and have become hard to sell outside of niche collectors who just like want one of every single one. And just as another fun fact for you, not all of these things sold well. There has been proof that some of them got repurposed into standard reissues or other guitars. But if you happen to have any of the answers to the holes in the stories of any of these, please leave a comment on this video so others can also learn your knowledge. Otherwise, I think the reason why a lot of these sit on Reverb for so long is because people just don't know or care, and they need a story to latch on to. And before we leave tonight, I also want to make mention, I didn't really talk about the different pickup sets that were used in here. Some of these actually, they recreated the pickups. A lot of these were aged by Tom Murphy, and I'm sure there's a lot of details I missed. Also, feel free to correct me in the description. I'm not trying to say I'm an expert on these collector's choices. I just wanted a nice condensed area where we can talk about these things. Alright, Troglodytes, I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next one. Take care. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, you might also enjoy the documentation of the Gibson Guitar of the Week series or the Gibson Guitar of the Month. You can click the videos on screen to check them out.